Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Friday, May the 2nd, 2025, and today we're going to talk about if you should use compost as a mulch or rather as an amendment when starting a garden on poor soil. We'll discuss what people get right and wrong about controlling the weather, aka geoengineering. Oh, and it's Feedback Friday, so let's do it. All right, well, happy Friday, everyone. The good old back, my back that is feeling a little bit better, and I was even able to get a small amount of work done yesterday, like getting those that trellis up for those tomatoes. More on that next week, though. Got a rainy forecast for the weekend, and considering I also have a weekend forecasted to be heavy in soccer coaching, I'm basically just going to be soaked for the next 3 days, so that's fun. Next week is also going to be sweet potato planting, so here's hoping that the rain stops eventually. That would be helpful. In fact, it's tempting to try and get them in today and let them enjoy the rain all weekend to get established, but I'm still not totally trusting the weather report just yet that says there's no frost in the forecast, even though most people around here plant on or around the Kentucky Derby, which is Saturday. I still need to get closer to the 10th before, which is our last frost date, to feel confident that we can get, sensitive stuff in the ground, in the field, especially with our sweet potatoes. They don't love that cold stuff. Anyway, it is Friday, which means Feedback Friday, where we explore what you all were saying about this week's topics. On Monday, we talked about the dramatic declines in honeybee populations this year, and there are a lot of comments on that subject, but I appreciated this from @KANN, Conman977, or 97, sorry, too many sevens there, who wrote, quote, "Honestly, I understand why honeybees are so important, but it's a huge disservice when we focus on them. Honeybees take good food for all of our native bees and pollinators, and when it comes to pollinators, bees are a fraction of the things actually pollinating plants. It's wasps, moths, butterflies, bats, and birds. If we want to save native pollinators, we have to reduce our beekeeping. It's a tough truth, but the evidence shows time and again that honeybees are good for pollinating, but are not the only option or the best option for ecology," end quote. So this is actually the other side of the honeybee coin, I guess. They are incredibly efficient foragers, and although the research is a little mixed in how negative the effects are on native bee populations, many bee ecologists agree that large populations of honeybees do threaten native bees by bogarting the forage, which can be and certainly is in some areas a major ecological problem. And absolutely, native bees and wasps and etc. are really, really great and widespread pollinators of a lot of our crops as well, and in many cases more than honeybees. We lack adequate research in general on native bees, but we do know that they are also being hit by pesticide use as well. We know that native insect populations are collapsing. We know that they are losing habitat in native flowers to modern agriculture. We effectively know that many of the same things affecting honeybees are affecting native bees, so I suppose that's where honeybees are relevant. We have actual numbers to back up the problem, and the solutions would help both native and domesticated bees, i.e. more flowers, more habitat, fewer pesticides, etc. Lots of good comments on that thread in general, so thank you all. On Tuesday, we talked about how many weeds were actually cultivated, some for very specific traits like abundant seeds, looking at you, Amaranth. This from Cat Funk's Fabulous Finds 97045 sparked a thought, quote, "I just watched a video, 30 Forgotten Vegetables, that helped people survive during World War II. Many foods were rationed and in short supply as Europe was being bombed. This video is really good as it mentions the nutritional value of many plants," end quote. So indeed, there are quite a few stories of people foraging in America and abroad to survive the thin times around wars. And I remember a similar story about children foraging to help feed their families through the Great Depression. In fact, now that I'm thinking about this, I even recall an episode of The Chef's Table on Netflix where the chef was struggling to afford food in those early years when you're starting a restaurant and realized he could forage for free from around the ocean to save on costs. Foraging is so powerful in that way. There is food absolutely everywhere if you know where to look and how to use it. I spent a lot of time foraging for many, many years, some of which I was doing for chefs, some of which I was just doing because we lived off grid and that's what you do with your time. I just loved learning new and different species I could use and how I could use them, from brewing teas from sassafras root, best root beer ever, to be sure, to identifying and using different edible mushrooms and flowers and herbs. Spanish colonists observed how indigenous Americans would feast on fresh clovers and harvest the grains of grasses for basic breads. Things that we don't necessarily think of as food or medicine are all potentially food and or medicine. It's really a fascinating world, rich with potential out there that largely gets ignored or plowed over. Great comments all over that one as well. On Wednesday, we talked about beans, and there were a lot of good recommendations for different beans that folks grow. But we also talked about broad forking, and I liked this for perspective from @IsaacPorter P9Y, who wrote, quote, Western PA, 6A with heavy clay. I have found that 5 to 6 years of broad forking have been enough for my soil, end quote. Yeah, I just got a message from someone working on clay so thick they could barely get their broad fork into it. That's a scenario where plants will not thrive and you will have to do some intervention, and your intervention may take longer than mine or someone else's, meaning you may have to broad fork every season for a few years or several years before things are really rocking. Like for this person, it was like 6 years. No two situations are the same for sure, so don't look at how fast someone got their gardens really humming and compare that to your own. Like children, gardens and soil all mature at different speeds. Then on Thursday, we talked about cedars, and I liked this from Joannu 3905, who wrote, quote, I'm a backyard vegetable grower and wonder at which scale a cedar becomes a useful time-saving tool versus being an unnecessary complication, end quote. And that's a good question, even for people on a slightly larger scale, because it is going to be different for everyone and really depend on what you're growing and on how much land and how much of it is directly seeded. I think once you make it through a season, you should know if seeding by hand is going to work for you in your context, because it's a very meticulous task, and if you're doing it on the ground, like from your knees or whatever, or bending over, it can be really hard on your back. Not to mention you then have to come over top of the seeds that you sow and press them into the soil, stepping on them or pushing them in with your hand or whatever, which are things that a cedar does for you. If after your first season or first part of the season it becomes too much, then a cedar will probably suit you well, and you'll know it. Great stuff as always this week, y'all. Best comment section on YouTube as usual. Anyway, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll do the compost in the soil or on the soil thing. BRB. Today's episode is brought to you by Farmhand. I started a CSA to grow food and build community, not to drown in admin work. Spreadsheets, emails, and pack lists take up too much time. If I could spend less time at my desk and more in the field, that'd be a win. Enter Farmhand. Farmhand automates billing, newsletters, websites, and member support, saving CSA farmers 20 plus hours a week. Focus on farming, not paperwork. See how Farmhand can help. Book a one-on-one demo with founder Ari at farmhand.partners/no-till. That's farmhand.partners/no-till. Today's episode of Growers Daily is also brought to you by Ring of Fire. What if you could turn your brush problem into black gold? The Ring of Fire biochar kiln is your spring tool for soil transformation, converting woody debris into high-quality biochar in just hours. Biochar will kickstart your compost, retain water and nutrients in your soil, and provide habitat for beneficial microbes. Now $19.95 with flat rate shipping. Their spring sale runs through June. Don't wait to boost your soil and optimize your inputs. Visit ringofire.earth/growers now to learn more. Also, for more information on biochar, check out the No-Till Market Garden podcast interview with Kelpie Wilson, inventor of the Ring of Fire kiln, that we will link in the show notes. All right, back to the show. If you, the listener, are enjoying this content, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-tillgrowers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere that questions come in, but I will always get to your Patreon questions. At least eventually. Now, today's Patreon question comes from Patreon member Papa John Misty, who writes, quote, Hey Jesse, I had a question regarding establishing new beds. I have a plot of land that has been primarily used to grow buckwheat. I am planning to disc and then build beds, but my question is how I should incorporate compost. I am not sure if it would be better to incorporate the compost when I am constructing the beds with a rotary plow, or just use the compost as a mulch layer to help with weed suppression and add some fertility. Our soils are loamy sand and slightly acidic with a not so great CEC, that's cation exchange capacity. meaning basically like its ability to hold on to nutrients. So I am prioritizing adding compost over other fertilizers to help improve the CEC. Would incorporating the compost for building the beds do more to help with this? Love the show. Thanks for all you do. End quote. All right. So this is an interesting question. Thanks, Papa John Misty. Always a fun name to say. Basically, you have some compost and you are trying to decide between using it as a mulch or using it as a soil amendment. The nice thing about that is that I don't think there's a way to go wrong here. There's necessarily a wrong answer. So here are some things to think about. First, where I can, I like to take care of the native soil, especially if I'm going to plow it anyway. I definitely want to make that plowing effort, all that work that you're going to put into the soil worthwhile, and put the soil in a place where it can succeed over the long haul. So even if you are not planning to use the compost in the native soil, like work it into it, you should at least take some soil tests and decide what, if anything, your soil could use if you're going to plow it anyway. Perhaps it's as simple as adding some biochar to improve that cation exchange capacity, while on the surface level, you're adding a compost mulch and growing plants to assist with improving its quality. Simply adding a compost mulch over top will eventually solve the issues within the soil, but it could take time. And depending on the level of compaction that you are dealing with, that amount of time may be a while. Sandier soils don't tend to suffer too badly from compaction though. Maybe that loam will add a little bit to it. So this may actually be a reasonable time for the plow and then mulch with compost approach to be effective. If you have the opportunity to also allow for a cover crop to work on that soil over the summer, for instance, that can be an excellent addition as well. In my experience, the first year with compost mulches can be tough with inconsistent production. I've not grown on loamy, sandy soils though, so it's hard to say what exactly would happen. Again, I don't think you can go wrong no matter which route you choose here, but if you do decide to add the compost first, you will still have to think about how to mulch or at least keep in place the resulting plowed soil afterward. If nothing makes sense in that vein, then sure, I say mulch with the compost and go from there. And really don't overlook the biochar element in the low CEC scenarios. Cation exchange capacity is a hard soil property to change, but biochar and compost are two things that can, at very least, improve it a little bit. I hope that is helpful. We're going to take a quick break, and when we return, we'll talk about climate control, sorta. Be right back. I'll be saved by rock and roll. You can take my money, steal my car and sell my clothes. You can take the shoes I'm in, go on and take everything. You can have about everything I own. Today's episode is also brought to you by FarmRaise. Still using QuickBooks for your farm's bookkeeping? You're wasting time and losing money. Farm finances can be overwhelming, but they don't have to be. FarmRaise Tracks is the all-in-one tool built just for farmers. Manage expenses, prep for taxes, run payroll, and plan for the future without spreadsheets or stress. Just clear, organized insights to keep your operation thriving. Thousands of farmers trust Tracks to make smart financial decisions all year long. It's time you did too. Use code NOTIL20, that's all caps, no spaces, NOTIL20 for 20% off the life of your membership at farmraise.com. All right, back to the show. All right, so I wanted to have a friendly, science-based conversation about geoengineering because this is a topic that I think is gravely misunderstood. It is often grouped in with conspiracy theorism, and so people who might actually care about it are turned off because of that association, or people don't fully understand how it's used or those sorts of things. Although it's not used like people sometimes suggest it is, geoengineering is a real thing that governments and private organizations have been experimenting with since the 1940s in various forms. So it's worth examining what it is and how it does or doesn't work, but also what it means that geoengineering is even a practice governments are looking at. To back up, geoengineering is the act of trying to control or modify the weather, so getting clouds to release rain, for instance, or dispersing rain clouds for, an event. They try to do this in China. Or more recently, people have been experimenting with reflecting sunlight to cool the surface of the Earth. Places like Colorado and Nevada actively seed clouds with silver iodide to encourage snowflakes to form and fall from certain clouds. And according to research, this sort of cloud seeding kind of sometimes vaguely works. If the right clouds and right conditions exist, it can technically create some precipitation, but it's not a lot, not always consistent, and the efficacy is generally debated. One of those 20% of the time it works most of the time sort of scenarios. Quoting a CBC article, quote, "A recent study measured the snow from 3 cloud seeding events and calculated that they caused enough water to fill 282 Olympic-sized swimming pools to fall over an area of 80 by 80 kilometers, a tenth of a millimeter on average at any given spot," end quote. That would equal, just so it's clear, 0.004 inches of rain, which required multiple planes and days to achieve. So great work, everyone. Anyway, China, who has the biggest cloud seeding program, famously said it kept the skies clear during the Beijing Olympic Games, though the scientific proof there is thin. China also tried to seed clouds to solve a massive drought, which the drought did eventually end. But whether that was the result of the cloud seeding is hotly debated because, well, droughts do generally come to an end. Recently, the British government said it is researching some solar geoengineering techniques that would be intended to reflect sunlight. Basically, according to the reports, the British government is trying to determine in an emergency where they needed to cool the country down if they could employ one of a few different strategies that would reflect sunlight with various aerosols right into the atmosphere, basically creating brighter clouds, that sort of thing. So they want to run some small field experiments. Heretofore, most of these solar geoengineering experiments that reflect sunlight have been carried out indoors, so they want to try and do it outdoors. And people are naturally skeptical because, well, to be honest, geoengineering has very little public support in general. People, including myself, are none too excited about the idea of stuff, even if it's just salt water, being sprayed into the atmosphere to change weather patterns or cool the planet or whatever. In fact, we already have a wildly popular technology that does that exact thing. We call them trees. To the point about public support, many of the real world trials have been shut down by the public, and I'll put a couple examples in the show notes if you're curious. Heck, many scientists even oppose this idea, and some organizations who study geoengineering even refuse to or are deeply hesitant to put money into actual field trials for many reasons, not least of which is the ethics of if you get a cloud to rain in, say, Colorado, how does that affect rain in, say, Kansas, and so on. So although the public support is low, seeing it from the government perspective, I guess alarmed by recent or increasing numbers of heat waves and or droughts and or megastorms, etc., they are interested in investigating if some of these technologies would work to protect their citizens. And no, just, to reiterate, these technologies barely work, if at all. Governments are not harnessing, for instance, what would be the equivalent of all the man-made energy in the world to create, for example, hurricanes, as I've seen suggested. It's just not that effective. So although there is effectively no public support for this stuff that doesn't really work that well anyway, what confoundingly and somewhat frustratingly also has almost no public support is simply taking care of the planet. So in the eyes of the world's governments, their hands are tied to come up with something to protect themselves. So they look to technology instead of nature for solutions. I've said this before, but it really doesn't matter if you believe in climate change or not. You still almost certainly, if you follow this podcast with any amount of regularity, believe in the incredible power of photosynthesis, and that, with enough ingenuity and public support, we could really maximize this planet to handle more or less whatever climatic shifts were thrown at it, utilizing its natural systems. Hi again, trees. Because forests and trees and well-managed pastures and clean bodies of water are capable of moderating weather and heat and hydrologic patterns on an extraordinary scale. To me, from my vantage, we are often being sold on what is wrong with the planet and with humans, and not on the potential of our planet and human ingenuity when working within natural systems. So we don't have to be sold on controlling the weather so long as we allow ourselves to be sold on protecting, increasing, and maximizing our natural systems. If you ignore the latter, you're going to get the former. Governments feel obliged to protect, not prepare, to treat symptoms, not causes, but that's on us as much as it is on them. It's public support. To me, it really kind of comes down to this. If we don't want governments exploring technological atmospheric solutions like geoengineering, then we need to encourage and reward politicians who support ecological, forest-heavy, environment-based solutions that maximize our planet. Give the government the green light to really invest in environmental solutions, and we won't be caught off guard by a government looking for radical triage-like solutions to protect their citizens. Anyway, now that I've destroyed the comment section for the day, I'm going to go off and enjoy the weekend, as I hope you will. I mean, we all have loads of good soccer to watch. These last few weeks of the Premier League are honestly always like a little sad, but some European football next year for my Albion would certainly ease the sting a little bit. Just saying. Don't forget, we at No Till Growers are now officially a 501c3, so donations are tax deductible and greatly appreciated. Please make sure to like and subscribe and or follow wherever you are getting this podcast. That's an easy way to help us out as well. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. And if you'd ever like to sponsor the show, you can reach out to Farmer Michelle at notillgrowers.com. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music, Mike Hilbert for the production help and editing, and the team over there at No Till Growers for their support. Also, shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear.
Oh yeah, it'll mess with your head.
Good choice, Mike. Probably. Pick up a copy of the Living Soil Handbook or the Seed Farmer at notillgrowers.com to support our work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/notillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or you sign up in the month of May, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs today to, oh goodness, I'm very sorry about this one. Oksana, hold on, I'm going to get it. Oksana Protowska. Oksana Protowska. Yep, it's at least one of those in some part, I hope. So sorry, Oksana. And James Young. I at least got one of the two, maybe mostly correctly. All right, so a little recap. A group of renegade gardeners has built an island of floating gardens on their local lake. Meanwhile, a population of humans who have survived underground or under the water for the last 100 years have taken interest in the gardens, specifically in the tomatoes, but I mean, who can blame them on that? But one of the younger ones was caught on the island and fell down and hurt themselves. And the gardeners are staring at this pale, sort of web-toed friend, wondering what in the world to do about this scenario. Context is everything in gardening, but no one ever said anything about fish people, one of them says. That's kind of actually the tagline for the whole thing. Anyway, as the gardeners are gently trying to revive this young lake inhabitant, two older people arrive on the boat from the water with spears in hand. The gardeners, suddenly frightened, I mean, as you would be, assure them, these lake people, that they want no trouble, but the lake people say nothing. They just grab their young member, snag another tomato off the vine, and disappear into the depths again. Once the lake people are gone, the gardeners kind of tell each other, like, no one is going to believe us on this. But then they remember the camera on their greenhouse to help them catch any saboteurs from the town that often would come out to the gardens. They'd float out there and try and damage some stuff. So anyway, a debate ensues between the gardeners and whether they should keep the footage, because it's an amazing story, but it's also pretty clear what the townspeople would probably do to these lake people. And that's when we fade to black. Thanks for watching and or listening. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. I will see you back here on Monday. It'll be awesome.